Let's start with the climate. After the UN climate report came out yesterday, warning that the planet is going to keep getting warmer. Humans are the cause of it, and there's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. It is pretty easy to feel despair and hopelessness. So how do you think we can collectively shift that sentiment?
Well, Christina on Twitter wrote in and said it's horrifying what we are seeing around the world, and it's terrifying what we heard from the report. We need to call on our government. We need to call our government out on all sides of the political spectrum. This is not supposed to be a partisan issue as they make it out to be. We all have to work together. And Christina, thank you for your thoughts. I totally understand what you're saying and agree. Like yesterday, I was filled with so much hopelessness and dread. And then I realized that the last thing that we can do right now is sort of roll over and be cynical and kind of be like, oh, well, I guess can't do anything. We can make choices on an individual level that has ripple effects. And I mean, I think my nephew just got back from Vancouver. It was his first time going out there. And I mean, Lainey, you can speak to this too, but he was so inspired by the sort of activism spirit that is there, that there's so many obvious differences in the ways in which businesses connect themselves without plastic, that the whole ethos of that community is filled with environmentalists, right? And you juxtapose that with these horrible fires that are going on. But he's now been inspired, and he came home and he wants to activate change, which in turn has made me want to make more changes. So all we can do is look at our circle of influence. So here's some things that I'm committing to right now. I'm going to start totally bucking this idea of more is more, buying less and making sure that what I do buy is often recycled or, reused. Less travel. I mean, that's already built in. I don't want to go anywhere, but I really want to hang on to that. And then and this has been inspired by Jan Arden too. She talks to me a lot about red meat and the impact that has. I'm like basically eating none. Maybe once a year. So those are little things. I also think we can advocate to our local grocers. Like, it should be a given that if something can't be recycled, it shouldn't be allowed in our grocery stores. So those are little tiny ways I think we can all sort of activate our activist spirit like Christina is feeling right now.
I know, but here's an honest question, Sin. Like, okay, getting a bamboo straw, versus China being the world's #1 emitter. I think that's where that hopelessness comes from, because I agree. I hope that nobody fully throws in the towel and gives up. But it's really, really hard when you do feel like the individual versus the country or the individual versus the corporation. And I do believe that every person has a voice, but it's really easy to slip when you're thinking like China and the United States. If anybody follows the news, they're not getting along. And those are the #1 and #2 polluters of the entire planet. And so how do you expect cooperation or the Paris Climate Accord when you have the two behemoths? Those are the two mega powers. They do not see eye to eye, and yet together they are responsible for some of the worst carbon emissions on the planet. My bamboo straw doesn't feel like it's got enough power against that.
I was like that yesterday too. I was absolutely filled with despair and honestly was like, Simon, let's just use whatever money we have, get on a yacht, eat French fries, and drink white wine, and that's it. Like, we're just going into the sunset. But then I saw a tweet that suggested people want to have the most fatalistic view of the world as possible because then it means they don't have to do anything at all to change. And I was like, who, me? And I did feel seen. That was definitely me. And then you're seeing prominent climate scientists really disappointed with the headlines that all seem to suggest there's nothing we can do and the future's absolutely hopeless. And these scientists were asking if anyone actually read this report. I'll put up my hand. I did not read the report. I just read the headlines. And within that report, it's quite simple, well, kind of simple. Stop burning fossil fuels. Warming will more or less stop when carbon dioxide emissions reach zero, meaning humans have the power to choose their climate future. And of course, I'm not saying it's that simple. I understand how much of the world is tied to fossil fuels and it's not going to change overnight. And certainly with sea levels rising, don't get me into the sea. I'm reading a book about the sea right now, and it's enough to get me onto that yacht. But not every prediction is locked in. And guys, remember, I read something else that also filled me with a bit of hope. Back in 1985, a scientist thought his instruments were actually malfunctioning when he discovered a hole in the ozone layer over Antarctica. And I know we're probably all old enough to remember that terrifying news. Everyone around the world was talking about it. And then 2 years later, in '87, dozens of countries signed the Montreal Protocol, which limited use of stuff like CFCs and averted catastrophe. So the world can do it. But I think the problem is we're in an era where that era, rather 1985, felt like a time where not believing in climate change wasn't an option. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, now it has become politicized, and there are
Yeah.
people who are just not believing in it to not believe in it. And that is something that we do have to battle every single day, as Christina brought up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it also requires, like, just that example that you cited, requires collaboration, right? Like, I mean, I hear what you're saying. Like, we all make individual choices, but to Mel's point, like, a lot of individual choices don't add up to, like, a huge impact the way, collective and collaborative and community choices, have a greater stretch. And that requires, like, buy-in, and not just small buy-in, like, hey, let's, not use this plastic anymore. But I think it's like a huge lifestyle shift.
Yep.
I think one of the reasons why everything has accelerated to this rate is because our lifestyle demands not just more, but quicker, right? Like, you order something
Fast fashion.
You order something
Convenience.
and you need it at your doorstep in 12 hours or less. Or even like things like work, our jobs, things need to be turned around so quickly, or more needs to be done in a shorter amount of time. So when we're thinking about making food choices, for example, a lot of food choices that are more economically sound are more expensive and require more time. So for parents out there who are ready, you need to get to work at 8 o'clock, you need to get to work at 9, you need to stay there until 6, the efficient option is often the plastic, because otherwise moms and dads, parents, they're waking up at 4 in the morning to do the sandwiches the economical way in order to get the kids out the door. So every piece of our lifestyle
Everything's connected.
fiber, exactly, Mel.
Is connected.
Ironically,
I will
if
say there's two
one
bright
thing
spots.
that we can take forward with what we've learned at the pandemic is that if we can slow down a little bit, we saw actual physical change by people slowing down and not driving into work every day, and their lifestyle actually changed at home as well. If there's something that we can bring forward from that, and if people are not tethered to work via car and getting in and can stay home and make lunch, let's do that too. It's a small thing, but it could be big.
When you talk about big, there's two big spots that I look at that does give me a little bit of hope. I became a board member at the World Wildlife Fund in Canada a couple of years ago, and that is Indigenous-led conservation. And we've all done a collective shift, hopefully, in this country and understanding and honoring the importance of Indigenous communities. Well, what's happening at the World Wildlife Fund is that with Indigenous-led conservation, that is a community, many communities who have it already baked into their culture how to care for and steward the land on which we live. And there are phenomenal, kind of miraculous things that are happening if you allow the people. What's that? I was about to mention one. Is that the Inuit community, for example, are single-handedly trying to save the caribou that have been subject to the mining activities in the north. And the kind of work that is being done, led by the Inuit, is like literally groundbreaking, and yet we're trying to say China change and United States change, and you realize that getting back to the basics for those who are the original stewards of Turtle Island, they already have all the answers. So that's one bright spot. The second bright spot for me is companies and investing your money and making your money talk. If a lot of people are investing out there, that's one major way that you can make an impact today. That does give me hope. There are companies, including one in Squamish, BC, that they say, okay, if carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is the problem, there are companies that are actually trying to capture carbon dioxide and make it either inert or neutral or transform it into something else. And that is a very quick, expensive, but quick way to actually capture the damaging CO2 and turn it into, for example, rock, which is what they're doing in Iceland, or rendering it inert, or rendering it into another biofuel. So if we can actually, and governments leading the charge on this, invest in those companies that are trying to make a real difference. And not just my bamboo straw, which is important, but to actually make massive difference on a world scale, that's the stuff that is going to pull me out of my despair that I feel like I'm currently in.
Lots of food for thought there.